So no fooling, there I was, brand new Green Beret, just graduated the Q course. And it was during a time where everybody that graduated got to go to free fall school. Free fall school is a little bit different than airborne, whereas airborne, when they yeet you out of the airplane, your canopy is tethered to the aircraft, so it deploys it for you. Free fall school, it's more like skydiving. So you're in charge of watching your altimeter, pulling your own ripcord, you're in charge of your own survival. Right after free fall school, I get stationed in Germany as my first team. And it was a blast. I loved the guys I got to work with there. Some of them are still my closest friends to today. Incidentally though, Germany's not a great place for airborne operations, and so I didn't do a whole lot of free fall jumping in Germany. Fast forward a couple years, I get orders to Fort Carson, Colorado. And so I moved back to the States, and I was stoked about that. And I landed on a free fall team. So every special forces team has their own kind of specialty. There's dive teams, there's ruck teams. I was on a ruck team in Germany. That's just a fancy way of saying we carry all of our junk on our back. And then there's free fall teams. So I was absolutely stoked to be on this free fall team. And I had the good fortune that three of my teammates had actually been instructors down at free fall school. So they have like thousands and thousands of jumps amongst them, and they're just so happy when they're falling out of an airplane. I personally was a little bit nervous to do my first jump with them, not only because they're super senior, but it had been about 3 years since I've jumped at altitude. Well, incidentally, our first trip together was down to Arizona to do a requalification. And that just means like they want to make sure everybody's skill set is up to par and that everybody's on the same page. So again, I was a little bit nervous, not only a new guy on the team, but probably a little rusty falling out of an airplane at altitude. But Monday morning, we get there, we get jocked up, and we're doing a Hollywood jump. So that's just your parachute, your helmet, and your altimeter. And we're walking out to the aircraft, and I'm, again, a little bit nervous. They have me in the middle of the stack. They got the senior guys up front, super senior guys in the back to kind of oversee everything as we're in the sky. And we get up to altitude, so it's 12 to 14,000 feet. The ramp drops open, we do our safety checks, we get that green light. First couple guys dive out, I get to the edge of the ramp, I dive out, I get on heading, check my altimeter, pull my ripcord, and everything goes perfect. I was like, yes. Because the first rule of special operations is always look cool, and you don't want to look dumb. And so, all right, so it's just like riding a bike. I remembered how to do this. As the week progressed, we just start adding more and more equipment to ourselves. And so by Friday, we're doing what's called a wall locker jump. So everything in our wall locker is now attached to us. So I've got a rucksack between my legs. I got my rifle across my waist, oxygen tank and the mask. I've got a chest rig it's got GPS and a boat compass, altimeter, radio. So we're all kind of weighed down. We all waddle out to the airplane. And I'm feeling pretty good about at this point because I've proven to myself that I've remembered how to do this skill. So we get in the aircraft, we do our safety checks, we check our oxygen and stuff like that. We get up to altitude, it's 12 to 14,000 feet or so. Ramp drops open, we get that green light. I'm ready to go. First couple guys exit the aircraft. I get to the edge of the ramp, dive out, good exit, get on heading, check my altimeter, pull my ripcord, and I look up and I've got line twists. It's not a huge deal. If you're gonna have a malfunction with your canopy, that's the one you want because it's real easy to fix. You just grab your risers, which is like the lines going from your harness to the chute, and you pull them apart and you eventually unwind. Interesting thing about free fall parachutes is they're designed a little bit different than your standard airborne chute. The free fall chutes are more like a wing. And so as you're falling, it creates forward drive. And the intent behind that is you can exit an aircraft, pull your chute immediately, all stack up in the sky, and then glide to your destination over long distances. It's pretty dope. Well, as I'm trying to unwind myself, my chute kicks me out sideways. And so now I'm essentially parallel to the earth, and it's driving me towards the ground. And then I begin to spiral. Okay, so my minor malfunction now turned into a big issue. And now I really start to spiral, and I'm like whipping through the sky. And I'm still trying to fix my situation, but somebody intelligent or more experienced would have just cut that parachute away, pulled their reserve, and everything would have been fine. I don't know if I'm stubborn or dumb or both, but I was just riding that wave. And so I'm whipping through the sky, and it's gotten to the point where I'm starting to pull some G's. So like my vision is starting to close in like this. I'm like, man, I'm in a bad spot. I better fix this. I guess the bad news is I was in a situation where I could have died. The good news though is I had the rest of my life to figure out the solution, right? That was a joke because, Okay, so as I'm spiraling, still horizontal in relation to the earth, kind of at the last second, my lines finally untwist. So I reach up, immediately grab my brake lines and yank them, and that levels me out. Now I'm under good canopy, but I'm incredibly dizzy. I'm like totally disoriented and I have no idea where anything is. So I'm looking all over the sky, trying to find my friends, and I can't find anybody. And that's when they all start yelling over the radio. Chris, you're going the wrong way. Chris, turn around. Chris, go left. No, your other left. Chris, check your GPS. So I'm looking down at my chest rig, and that GPS is just going in circles because I'm just so dizzy. And finally, there's a little bit of a break in radio chatter. And Matt, super senior guy, I've only seen him smile when he's falling out of an airplane. But he comes over the radio and he's very calm. He says, hey, Chris, turn towards the sun. And so I'm looking around. We were jumping in the morning. Our drop zone was generally east of us. And I see it, it's right behind me. So I hit a hard left turn. About that time, my buddy Andy kind of swoops in front of me and guides me, and we all land on the DZ together. And I pull my oxygen mask off, and I'm just dry heaving because I'm still pretty nauseous at this point. And then we unrig, and I eventually take Matt out for a beer that night because I owed him one. And he says, Chris, what you experience is what I call the Phoenix phenomenon. And in each of our chutes, there's a device called a cypress that if I were to exit the aircraft unconscious and was just falling at terminal velocity, once I hit a certain altitude, that cypress would recognize that something was wrong and would fire and deploy my reserve for me. And so I could land relatively safely, even if I was unconscious. But Matt was telling me because I was spiraling, because I was not falling fast enough, that cypress wouldn't have recognized the issue, and I would have just burned in like a phoenix. That's why he calls it the Phoenix phenomenon. Okay, so what's the point of the story? I'll tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Chris Lee. I spent 10 years in the Army, 7 of which was in Special Forces. The other 3 was the entire Q course. I decided to get out in 2022 and start my own coaching business. And my entire philosophy around my coaching business is based on 3 tenets: the Phoenix, the Serpent, and the Tribe. Now, the Phoenix is in direct reference to the story I just told you. And I think the big takeaway that I think about every day from that experience is, as we're navigating the chaos of day-to-day life and trying to navigate through all the junk that's showing up and disorienting us, we have to have a reference point off in the distance that we can reorient ourselves to. And I found that the best way to create that reference point in your own life is kind of twofold. The first being identity, and then the second being long-term goals. So what do I mean by identity? When I'm coaching folks, I always start with this question: who do you want to be? And then they sometimes start spouting off like, well, I want to be a millionaire, or I want to earn a PhD, or I want to whatever, have a big fancy house. I'm like, that's awesome. Those are goals. Tell me, who do you want to be? And this is why I start with identity. Identity, in my opinion, is the foundation on which you can then stack all of your goals. Who you are striving to become is that North Star, that guiding point, that foundation on which everything can be placed. Because sometimes, particularly like with social media nowadays, everybody starts chasing the Lambo or the McLaren or that super fancy car, the big mansion, and we start working towards these goals. Or maybe your mom or dad told you to be a doctor or a lawyer, and we start chasing after that. And then halfway there, you realize, man, I just wanted a cabin in the woods and some peace and quiet. Had you had that identity laid out first, then the goals sort themselves out. When I have people tell me who they want to be, I break it down into 5 different categories. And each one of these could have subcategories to it, but I think these are the heavy hitters. So I always start with mental, and then physical, emotional, social, and financial. I think if you can establish the kind of person you want to be in each of those areas first, then start stacking goals on top of that, you're setting yourself up for success. So identity first. Tell me who you want to be first. And then we move into actual goal setting. Tell me what you want to achieve. And I use somebody way smarter than me came up with this acronym. It's the SMART acronym for long-term goal setting. It stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. The specific and measurable part, that's pretty self-explanatory. Get as specific as you can when you're setting your goals. Because the mind is a very interesting thing. When you present it with a problem, it immediately tries to come up with a solution. And so if you give it a very vague problem to solve, hey, I want to be healthier in 5 years. Okay, the brain starts working on that problem. But if you dial it in, if you get real specific and say, all right, I want to be 210 pounds with a 10% body fat, VO2 max of this, resting heart rate of sub 50. I want to be able to bench 315, squat 405, and deadlift 500. That's specific. Now your brain starts to solve that problem. So specific and measurable, again, kind of self-explanatory. The attainable thing. I often have to encourage the folks I work with, aim bigger. And the reason I say that is, I'll paraphrase a quote from Bill Gates. We often overestimate what we can accomplish in a year, but drastically underestimate what we can accomplish in 5. And so when I'm working with folks to plan out their 5-year goals, I'm like, aim bigger, aim bigger. Having said that, I am never going to play in the NBA. And so I'm just not tall enough, and I'm horrible at basketball. So it's a little late in the game for me to try to shoot for that. So there is this fine line in regards to attainable. I think a lot can be accomplished, but sometimes you have to be realistic. The relevant piece, that ties directly back into your identity that you've set up. And I'll give you a quick story. So for me, in the mental category, my identity that I'm striving for constantly is I am a constant learner. I constantly want to be taking in new information, new skill sets, and apply them to my life to make myself a little bit better. And so the goal that I tied to that identity is I'll just read a book a week for 5 years. Well, I started off and I was doing pretty well, but then I got behind schedule. As you know, life happens and interrupts your routine. So I was getting behind schedule and I was starting to feel kind of guilty, a little bit shameful, and then I got really behind schedule. And as a result, I was just picking up whatever book I could burn through as fast as possible just to get my numbers back up. And I did that for a little while, and I didn't even care what the book was. I just wanted something quick I could burn through. And after a minute, I took a pause. I was like, wait a second. Is this in alignment with the kind of man I want to be? And the truth was, no, it's not. Because I was so wrapped around the axle with getting my numbers up and how many books I was reading that I was losing the focus of I am a constant learner. I wasn't retaining the material that I was trying to pick up. And so I actually was able to set that goal aside and readjust it because I had that identity firm and in place. And so now I'm far less concerned with the number of books I read, far more concerned with the quality of book I read and how much I can retain from it.